After all the sorrows we've endured, do you really think that I want to destroy this last piece of his soul?
Don't.
Life keeps forcing cruel choices. We do what we must.
One of the most emotionally affecting scenes in Clair Obscur Expedition 33 to me is the one that occurs after the final Renoir fight, where everything is stripped bare and the two destructive gods of this world simply reach out to one another, through hate and grief and anger, to comfort one another. Renoir and Aline were two of the three primary antagonists throughout the story, and the grand scale and emotions could almost make one forget the reason that they're here in the first place. That reason being that just like our protagonists, they simply love their family. And of course, they love each other. We had naturally been told of their profound love for one another, but in this moment, I truly felt it for the first time and was able to properly connect to both as broken human beings trying not to lose their family. One in vain, and one in what increasingly seems like futility. These are two people who joyfully found each other, who shared a love of art and explored so many worlds together, who brought up a loving family, a family that was then torn apart by tragedy. If this story was unable to properly sell you on the humanity of Renoir and Aline, and particularly that they shared a loving history and bond, a large part of the story would have fallen flat. But to me, the tenderness of this scene encapsulates that humanity. These are partners for whom family is everything, who would commit any crime and sacrifice all if it meant being whole with their loved ones again, but who go about it in totally different ways due to the differing ways that they process grief. One selfishly creating life to escape, and more pertinent for this topic, one destroying life to brutishly confront reality. When faced with a reality in which he sees his wife and daughter very potentially wasting away after the death of his son, while his other daughter buries herself in war, Renoir is fueled with a devilish conviction to burn the world to cinders to defend that which he cares about. He has suffered immense loss himself, but he cannot properly confront it when fearing that same loss on an even grander scale, and so he resolves to become the devil himself if necessary to force life to move on. No matter what, to a fault, Renoir always does what he does to protect and save his family. Does that automatically make him right or good? No, of course not. But it does make him sympathetic to me, and more importantly, it establishes a foundation and a bridge of understandability to make his faults more interesting. Because for all of his talk about how Aline and Alicia refuse to move on and drown themselves in fantasy and escapism, Renoir cloaks himself with that very same thing through his axons. He pours his heart into creating them for his ultimate goal of stopping Aline. But as stated by Maëlle, it seems that they double as parables reflecting the family that he is trying so hard to hold on to by being modeled after each member of that family. And the way that they're summoned to protect and defend him in his final battle is very reminiscent spiritually and thematically of how Aline surrounds herself with the painted family that he demands she move on from. Of course, he is not as dependent on the axons as Aline is on her painted family, but nonetheless, it's a devastating parallel showing that consciously or otherwise, Renoir can directly relate to Aline's method of coping and shows shades of hypocrisy in his imitation of that.
I just want you to understand what this canvas means to me.
I do understand. I know how powerful and intoxicating it is. How deeply attached we can become to the worlds we pour our hearts and souls into.
But in spite of this, Renoir is willing and actually desperate to part with his Axon family in order to be with his true family, and his conviction for this is resolute to say the least. He sees his wife and daughter losing themselves in grief, slowly rotting away on the outside, and so he resolves to destroy it all to get his family back. But what's important to emphasize is that it's not like he dehumanizes those in the painting. I think he very much respects them and views them as whole beings of life and value, as shown by his axons as well as multiple instances throughout the story.
Grief often blinds us, and we make choices we can never take back.
You grieve for two.
I grieve for many.
Some of Elene's finest work. I regret that it caused you so much pain. What Elene did was unfair to you most of all. Please, accept the Descendre family's apologies. I know it seems absurd to offer oblivion as recompense, but perhaps that's the outcome we both desire.
His genuine interest in and empathy for the Lumerians tells a tale. Why would he ask them about who they are, how they feel, what they've experienced, if he didn't care and viewed them as fake? If he didn't respect them as forms of life, he wouldn't bother interacting with them on a human level. But he does, and so he isn't cold and heartless here. But at the same time, there just isn't a competition. He knows that this world is full of life. He just doesn't care nearly as much for that life as he does for his family, and would do anything, manipulating the party, wearing a mask to progress them to defeat Aline, and literally eradicating a whole world to bring them back. Renoir has no illusions about the morality of his crusade, and he knows that he's doing horrific things. One of his most iconic lines is about how life continues to give them cruel choices, and this is a cruel choice to him because of the ramifications. He's self-aware of his depravity, but he just doesn't have enough room left in his heart to care. He's tired of it all, and he will lie, manipulate, and sacrifice a world for those that he cares most about. Like father, like son.
You can hate me, but that's a choice I must make. As your father, I must look out for you, especially when you can't look out for yourself.
You treat me as if I'm still 5!
I treat you as if the shadow from the worst day of our lives is going to suffocate you and take you from us too!
However, despite how unbelievable this character is, I don't think that you can get the full picture of his impact on the story without discussing his painted counterpart. Because while I view painted Renoir and original Renoir as two separate characters, they are mirror reflections and foils that are intrinsically linked to one another in a way, and so I don't really like to discuss one without discussing the other. As I said in my Verso video, to feel closer to Verso and to escape the pain resulting from her son's death, Aline took refuge in his canvas world and painted a world of people within it and an idealized family to keep her company. This included a painted Alicia, scarred, disabled, and reflective of Aline's cruel thoughts of her, a submissive, painted Clair, a Verso imbued with the genuine substance and memories of the original whose creation was in itself a cruelty, and a painted Renoir. This Renoir was imbued with some specific traits that we see in the original, particularly a wisdom and broad comprehension of the implications of his actions, an ability to understand and sympathize with those he opposes, but notably, a conviction and determination to carry out his goal no matter what in spite of that. That goal, of course, being the defining element of Renoir, a binding love for his family and a desire to keep them together. Aline was cruel in creating these forms of life that essentially existed for her whims, to act how she wanted them to act, to defend and placate her while the originals would defy her. But she had to imbue them with genuine traits characteristic of the originals, otherwise she would not be able to lose herself in the illusion. Tragically, that love for family is probably a big reason of why she fell in love with Renoir in the first place, so she painted him with that trait. And for that reason, the painted Renoir is defined by a love for his family.
If saving you means losing you, then so be it.
Despite his horrific deeds that mirror those of the original, Painted Renoir is one of the most horrifying and sympathetic characters in the story to me. He is, by the nature of his creation, incapable of defying Aline's wishes due to how she painted him to be accepting of her stance. Yet at the same time, he does contain true traits of Renoir within him, and as such, lives and dies by protecting his loved ones. So you'd imagine that an instinct deep inside screamed out at him to not adhere to Aline's wishes, and maybe a part of him wanted to question whether what she was doing made sense for her own happiness. But he can't do that, and if that part exists, this internal contradiction stops before it can manifest externally. All he can do is his duty, which I need to stress is something that he absolutely commits to and does out of his own desires, despite my musings on whether he would commit quite this much if he had true freedom. But he's confined to a shallow existence, constantly being forced to kill off expeditions and stop them from destroying his wife's dream. And note that I'm not saying that he's doing this against his will, but more so that due to the nature of his creation, his will and the things he feels are the only things that he is capable of feeling. His son even turns against him for this, and he has to fight against him to try to bring him back to him. Again, reflective of how the original Renoir fights Maëlle to bring Alicia back to him. Verso states that he chooses not to heal his own scar as a reminder of his agency and the choices he makes and how painful those choices can be. And Painted Renoir does the same thing, perhaps for the exact same reason. Perhaps he'd like to think that despite the pain it represents, his choice is completely his own. But I don't believe that it is. I doubt that this Renoir would side with the original Renoir if he had complete agency, but the point is that he's incapable of being able to make the choice, and that is inhumane. Painted Renoir's feelings are genuine, but they are forced upon him, and so his life is bereft of the agency and freedom that the original has, while making similar but opposing choices.
We're taking her down. She's not the only one who grieves. The pain of losing you, she made me inherited. Punishment, perhaps, for not being there when it mattered.
Now, it is worth noting that I've seen some pushback on the idea that Painted Renoir lacks some agency. Some think that he is totally free to act how he likes and chooses to defend his family the way he does, just as the original chooses a similar stance from an opposing position. Some think that the only difference he has from the original Renoir would be his place of origin and the nature of his family, and I get that too. It's valid. But personally, due to the trapped nature of Aline's other creations, the overall feel of the dynamic between Renoirs, the nature of some of Painted Renoir's lines alluding to some internal strife, and some other things, this is just how I see it. To me, he is bound by the chains of Renoir. Original Renoir fights against all in the painting to bring his family back to their reality, whereas Painted Renoir is idealized and trapped to an extent, but likewise fights against all to make sure the family and Aline survive. He feels trapped and forced to act a certain way, but above all, like the original, he loves his family. And so like the original, he will do all that he can to save it. For one Renoir, that means destroying the world. For the other, it means destroying all who would threaten to destroy the world. Both would obliterate everything in their path if it meant their family could rise from the ashes. The problem is, Aline is a part of both families.
I refuse to lose my son.
That son was a stranger.
But you're not. You're not.
You know how little remains of my life outside.
Alicia, you'll die. You've already been here longer than you should.
But...
No. Look at me, I said no. I am not letting my daughter risk her life. Alicia.
Both the original and painted Renoir, despite being opposites, fight to keep their family together. Both do their utmost to save Aline from their own differing perspectives. Both grieve when they lose their son Verso. Both scramble to maintain the fragments of family that they have, and both slaughter all in their path to that end, even fighting their own children to save them from their perspective. Such are the chains of family. They free us, they make life worth living, and they imbue our lives with love. But become too dependent on that for one reason or another, forcefully or otherwise, and it is scary what we would do, the lengths that we would go. Renoir is a mass murderer, but he is not an evil man. And that sentence feels like it shouldn't make sense, but it does. He does evil things, but is he in essence an evil man? Not for me, although I know that many will disagree with me on that, and that's fair. I just don't think that he's an evil man, though. He is an incredibly relatable man, and that is a scary thing. I do sometimes spare a thought of wonder in pondering what the two Renoirs thought upon seeing the other at the end of Act 2. Outside of his combative words about how Aline was out of his counterpart's grasp, did painted Renoir feel an ironic reverence, or maybe an envy at seeing a version of himself capable of acting completely on his own? And did the original Renoir feel hatred at how diametrically opposite to his ideals the painted one seemed to be? Did he feel pity perhaps, or maybe a sadness at how different Aline's idealized version of him was, and as such, how different she wished him to be? Did he feel how far the two had strayed upon seeing this? As he says to her, they were supposed to be partners, not enemies. But grief tears you apart. And there is no greater example of that in the story than Renoir, both the world-ending bringer of death and the devilish servant, each doing all that they can within their means to simply get their family back. Many thanks for watching.